Hello. Hey. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show podcast version thereof. I'm doing a podcast version this morning because my wife is still not able to drive after giving birth to our son, Jeremiah McKinnis Dixon. And so I need to take her to an appointment. So you're getting an early podcast. And so let's jump right into it. First of all, thanks for our patrons. Can't do this without you. Everyone who's listening, everyone can be a patron. $1 a month, $3 a month. Go become a patron today. Let's talk about Joe Kennedy III. I've been watching him for a little while. You can tell as soon as someone makes a grandstand, and I'm not saying that as a pejorative here or to slam him here. It's just what politicians do. He began grandstanding, I would say, about a year ago. Early on in the Trump administration, he replaced Barney Frank from Massachusetts, from the same district as in Massachusetts back in 2012. So he's been kind of low-key for a little while, and he began grandstanding. And again, it's not an insult because that's what politicians do. Back in 2016, late 2016, early 2017, at the beginning of Donald Trump's presidency. He has been tapped by the Democratic Party to give the response to the State of the Union address, which oftentimes goes tragically bad. I mean, everyone remembers Marco Rubio's water fiasco. There have been some really horrific tragedies in career-ending events when people try to give the response to the State of the Union. So let's see how he does. He's a good speaker. He's 38 years old, born 1980, just like me. Everyone thinks he's young, and some people think he's good-looking. I mean, you know, I like gingers, but, you know, there's other, I'm not too sure exactly how good looking he is, but we'll let those who are, we'll let somebody else decide that. That's besides the point. But it is a part of the bigger point is that he's young and, he is considered to be good looking by some, and he's well spoken, and he has a great family name, Kennedy. He has all of the factors that the Democratic Party is looking for the next generation of Democratic leaders. And, well, I don't know what you guys have come to expect. You never really know with me which way I'm going to go. So I was going to say, you know, you guys know where I'm going with this, but maybe you don't know where I'm going with this. There is a problem that needs a solution that I don't think either side in the Democratic wars of civil wars that continue to rage on today, I don't think either side is prepared for. But with the ascent of Joe Kennedy III, who still thinks marijuana is bad for adolescents, according to an interview he did with Boston.com, which I'm okay. He is vested in, he has investments in a major pharmaceutical company that charges $1,000 a pill for diabetic patients. And in the interview, when he was discussing why he still has that investment, he said it because most of it is a part of a trust fund, or actually all of that particular investment is a part of a trust fund that he does not control. But I like what the commentator said, and I believe it was in Marijuana Times or some marijuana publication I was reading. And he was saying, you know, the Kennedy family has never had a problem challenging and changing the world, but they have a problem challenging and changing their accountants. So I'm not sure if I really buy into the excuse that, oh, this is in a trust fund, so he can't control it, or even on the opposite side of it, you know, it is in a trust fund. And so it's not as though he went and selected it. So it's kind of, it's kind of an apathy. You know, if he was serious about that, not being associated with a company that is charging these exorbitant prices for life-saving medication, if he was passionate about it, he would overturn hell and high water. He will go through hell and high water, right? He left no stone unturned until he got it fixed. And he's shown that he's, rather apathetic about it. So to me, that's like a net that's not a net positive, not a net negative. It's just kind of neutral. It doesn't really calculate into it for me, because what I don't do, and I hope that we can stop doing on the progressive side, and there's a very specific reason why we have to stop doing this. I won't create villains out of people who are merely apathetic. I won't take this and look at him and say, oh, Joe Kennedy is, he's an arm of the pharmaceutical industry, and he's a pharmaceutical industry shill. Well, he does get funding from the pharmaceutical industry, to be sure, and that would be more of the reason why I would be suspect of him than his investments that are tied up in a trust fund. So looking at who donates to him, he gets money from Bain Capital, he gets money from Wall Street, just like almost every other politician, with save a few. Who donates to him really concerns me more than that personal investment that he claims that he doesn't have any significant control over, such that he could change it. Trying to build a profile of him to give you the pros and the cons, but it's not really about Joe Kennedy. Before I'm done with this conversation, it's going to be about you and me. Okay. So Joe Kennedy, he's giving the State of the Union response. He's a good speaker. I think he's kind of a boring speaker, to be honest with you. I have a really high bar for speakers. Barack Obama bores me sometimes, a lot of times. So I have a high bar for, especially not in terms of intonation and not in terms of excitement, because one of the best speeches I ever heard, the speaker didn't raise his voice at all. Right, it was rather monotonous or monotone, but what he said, right? And so when you hear the cliches make me want to vomit. Cory Booker's cliche last week via Twitter, he said, if America's never broken your heart, then you just don't love her enough. And I'm like, bruh, please take the platitudes and shove it up. Well, anyway. So Joe Kennedy is boring in that respect. He's going to give a lot of platitudes. And he's going to talk with his Boston, his Boston accent. And he's going to talk really fast because that's how he talks. And so I'm not excited in terms. He doesn't excite me as a speaker. The only thing that excites me about him as a speaker is that he at least attempts to be bold, and that's something in this era of milquetoast politicians. He at least attempts to be bold in his speech. But anyway, so I'm not really excited in that regard. We'll see how he does. The other thing about him that is really shocking, I'm not sure if I have even mentioned this yet. It's been a long show already. But he is anti-marijuana. Yes, I did, because I remember he said, I said earlier that he thinks that marijuana is really bad for adolescents. And okay, fine, kids should not smoke marijuana, but can we please? He doesn't want the legalization of marijuana, right? And, to be a guy of my age, there's really no excuse whatsoever to be anti-marijuana. Now, I'm going to say this. This is not a deal breaker for me like it is for some, and I'm one who adamantly promotes the use of marijuana, particularly for people who are in pain. I have people in my life that are in pain on a regular basis, and they just absolutely refuse to eat an edible or smoke marijuana, but they pop Percocet, to kill the pain. I'm like, this stigma that Joe Kennedy is contributing to around marijuana is ridiculous. All right, it's a life-saving drug. But anyway, I don't have to convince you. I'm trying to convince I'm shouting at the wind, trying to convince the wind, because here we are, a guy who's my age. Now, people are going to tie this back to say, oh, it's the pharmaceutical investments because the pharmaceutical industry is, okay, that's a possibility that he is willing to oppose something that the majority of Americans support in exchange for the contributions that he gets and his investments in the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, for some people, that's a straight line connection. But to be honest with you, there is the possibility that because there are people that are way younger than me who see marijuana as like still this great taboo. We're still not past the Rubicon. Well, actually, let me start that sentence again. We are past the Rubicon. We are moving in the direction where everybody gets it, right? But there's still a lot of people, young people, who believe that there's something wrong with marijuana. So that's the possibility in this calculus as well. But even if he is blocking marijuana for his donors, the marijuana issue is not the deal breaker for me, as much as where he stands on issues like Medicare for all, which he did not support. There's a couple pieces of legislation he voted against, restricting the NSA's ability to surveil. There are a couple of issues that like trump the marijuana issue for me, that sets off my red flags, red alert warnings for Joe Kennedy III. Now, all of that being said, like I said before this was over, it's going to be about you and me. All that being said, I guess I kind of want to read some tweets. That's what I want to read some tweets, because I want to give you not just my reaction to it, but I want to set this up because I don't want you to think I'm just creating a straw man here. The first tweet I'm going to read is from my friend Glenn Greenwald over at The Intercept. He had a very visceral response to Joe Kennedy III. He said this yesterday. He said, "What's going to change the downward spiral of the Democratic Party is a rich, nepotistic, $15 million. I'm sorry, I skipped a line. So let me start again. I'm reading this on a new phone. The interface is a little different. What's going to change the downward spiral of the Democratic Party is a rich, nepotistic prince who inherited wealth of $15 million, who is vehemently against marijuana legalization and pro-surveillance. Just what they need." Talking about Joe Kennedy. Now, for Glenn, I think it's fair to say, I think the number one issue for Glenn Greenwald is the surveillance state. Right. But anyway, I'll keep reading. Before I go into that, I want to read a couple more. Robbie Mook, former campaign chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign, said he's a big fan. And as soon as people saw that Robbie Mook liked him, then he became the enemy. Joyanne Reid, she's in love with Joe Kennedy III. And as soon as a lot of people saw that, Joe Kennedy became the enemy, and then people sunk their teeth in. So one more tweet about this is from a friend, Walker Bragman. He said, according to MapLight, in 2016, Joe Kennedy took $23,000 in PAC money from a securities and investment firm, including $5,000 from Goldman Sachs, $10,000 from UBS. He also took $6,000 from commercial banks. Here it is. Kennedy's voting record on Wall Street indicates he's a party line guy. So you have yet another skirmish. I am going to tie it here. Yes, this is yet another skirmish in the Hillary versus Bernie wars. I don't care about that so much as to say, if you really dislike Joe Kennedy III, which I'm on the side of, I'm not really a fan. I'm not going to say that I vehemently despise him and that I think that he is the pharmaceutical Manchurian candidate and that he is he's a Wall Street shill. That kind of visceral response, even though there's some of those things that I just said, some of those things are true. But generally what happens is when people can say those phrases together, the person becomes persona non grata, and they become the enemy, and they become the person that we have to stop and destroy for the sake of progressivism. I'm not there. I'm not really a fan, but I'm not there. And the reason I'm not there is because I'm not allowing myself to get there for just about anybody. Because it's not so important who we oppose. Here it is. Who are we going to promote? Because in a competition between Joe Kennedy III, young 38-year-old, some women are going to say, some men are going to say he's good looking, not my cup of tea. I'm more of a... I can't think of a politician that I think is good looking right now. I think Kamala's good looking, but she's conventional good looking for me, but I digress. Some people are going to say he's good looking, he's well spoken, he's got a good pedigree, which should be a non-issue at this point. It shouldn't even be a plus in the plus category, but we're not there yet. But the important thing is, let me stop beating around the bushes. Who the hell are we going to promote as progressives? Because it can't be Bernie Sanders. And I absolutely love Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is the man, with the exception of his blind spots. He has some recurring blind spots that some people don't want him to be held accountable for, but I will always hold him accountable for some of his blind spots. But besides that, I absolutely love Bernie Sanders. Hell, I love Jeremy Corbyn. You know, I'm okay with old white men, so long as they have the right policies. But we're not going to get another old person. We're not. The last. It's a generational shift. It's underneath all of the things that are going on with the anti-Trump movement, all the things that are going on in the Bernie versus Hillary wars. We are collectively getting to the point where we don't want anybody over the age of 70 or over. And we might push that down to about 60. And this is not to say that ageism is fine, because it's not, right? The more qualified, the better candidate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Bernie Sanders is going to be like 7,000 years old in 2020. Of course, I'm being hyperbolic. Of course, he's in better shape. He's probably in better shape than me right now. I'm pretty bad off right now. So he's in good shape. He probably would be alive till he's 85, 90. And I get that. But culturally, there's a shift that's happening right underneath our feet. And unfortunately, the Democratic establishment has found their Camelot. They have found their new poster boy, and he's a young guy, 38 years old. So who are the progressives going to counter with? Forget about even age. Who are we going to counter with, period? We have Bernie Sanders at the top, and we've already run him, and he did an amazing job, and he's inspired a vast movement that is second to none. But Bernie's not going to win. And I'm only saying that because, not because I don't think he can win. I'm saying that because we need to snap some people into reality. We've got to get a progressive bench. We've got to get some young national progressive leaders out there who can counter people like Joe Kennedy III, or at least present an alternative and a contrast. Right now, if the contrast is between Joe Kennedy III and Bernie Sanders, I'm not sure that that's going to bode well for the future of the progressive movement. Because, you know, here's the thing. If you want this to be purely about the issues, then I've got a rude awakening for you. Politics is rarely about the issues. In fact, it's just serendipitous that politics became less and less and less about the issues during the first presidential televised debate between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon. It was the appearance. It was the appeal to youth. Pop culture became inserted into the political spectrum. Right? So it's just a twisted sense of fate and irony that in this conversation that we're having, trying to help people to understand, I get it that you have a list of issues that you are well versed on, that you can go and find opensecrets.org and find out exactly who's donating to this guy, and you want to convince everybody that he's the worst person in the world. Joe Kennedy is the pharmaceutical Manchurian candidate. I get it that you have all the facts and details outlined showing where his voting record is way worse in terms of being a progressive than Bernie Sanders. I get it. But do you realize that the majority of the voting population, one, is not ready to consume all that. Two, probably would not know the significance of it. Three, would kind of wash it away, erase it, whitewash it, and turn and look and be like, oh man, he's young. He's a good speaker. He's a bold speaker. He's a Kennedy. They're going to look at all the superficial things and be like, boom, that's our guy. And if we have to wait to change the mind of the voting electorate and make them and bring them up to the level of each of us and each of you, the progressive movement is in trouble. So I say all this to say that ultimately, guys, ladies and gentlemen, this is about us. This is about us as progressives. And actually it's about you as a progressive, because if you really dislike this guy that much, then the question is, who have we found to counter him in the age bracket? Because that plays in a very significant fashion. We've got to do it. And I'm not saying, I guess, well, let me say it in a positive way, right? Sometimes people can't take the positive out of a negative connotation, a negative sentence. But in a positive way, the progressive movement must absolutely find a new generation of leaders. And without that generation of leaders, we're going to succumb. We're going to always be in second place to a party that has plenty of conventional party line players who are young and in line. I mean, people who've been trained by AIPAC. Black people who've been trained by AIPAC, young, good looking. They're in line, ready to take over. And the question is, if we're the progressives, really where we are, to be honest with you, we're getting our feet underneath us. We are we're answering some questions between us, right? And by that, I mean, we're having some arguments, some internal debates, and we're seeing what foments to the top. And perhaps it's going to take another cycle for us to actually get our feet underneath us in a very organized fashion, through which we can promote voices that we want to counter the establishment. But we better hurry up and get it done, because otherwise, if you're going to put me in a question, if you're going to ask me between Trump and Joe Kennedy III, I'm putting on a Joe Kennedy III T-shirt. I'm going to break out my fake Boston accent. I'm going to say that I'm from Massachusetts and that I support this guy. And it's not just because he's anti-Trump. It's because, you know what? On 90% of the issues, I'm okay with him. The 10% is a critical 10%. And if I found somebody else who would be and fill up that last 10% or make up that last 10%, then that would be my person. It's very simple. I mean, it's very simple. So if we are going to oppose him, then we better oppose him with someone who can beat him and be better than him and offer more of our ideological tendencies. I really botched that sentence because I wanted to avoid saying something extremely rude. But who can represent us better. Let me just say it like that. That way I don't have to say anything rude. We better, or else we're going to be stuck with a party whose bench, now they're finally realizing, okay, it's a shame that the DNC is getting wind of the fact that they have to have younger voices. And the progressive movement, I mean, honestly, we're sitting around eating our young. We're eating our young in some regards. Actually, let me correct that statement. We're not eating our young. We're sitting around trying to eat the Democratic Party's young. And in the meantime, we're not giving birth to anyone. That's what's actually happening. We're so fixated on attacking the DNC, the Democratic Party, anyone who's a part of the neoliberal, institution, third-way Democrats, which I agree we need to oppose. But we're so focused on that I've yet to see a single person rise to the national stage that could replace Bernie Sanders. Not a one. It's not Nina Turner. It's not Nina Turner because I'm not sure that's what... I honestly don't know if that's what she wants. It has nothing to do with whether or not she's qualified and capable. I think she is qualified, capable, and I would definitely support her. But I'm just and maybe I'll just ask her. I'll ask her because just looking at the body of her work since the election, it looks like she's moving more into the organizing space than the campaign space, running for office space. And that makes a difference. I mean, we do need people in the organizing spaces. So I'll send her a message and see what she says. But other than that, who do we have? Who do we honestly have? And without that person, then, in the absence of real, who said this? In the absence of real leadership, I'm trying to think of the finish the statement, but in the absence of real leadership, people will take whatever they get. I'm going to paraphrase it. All right. Couple of other things that I think are important for us to talk about this morning. So there was an article that came out of the New York Times this weekend, Friday, that really sent some waves through the social media sphere, the Twitter sphere. And it caught up with one person in one organization, Randy-Bryce for Wisconsin, and Jacobin magazine, the socialist magazine in New York. Randy-Bryce is running against Paul Ryan, Iron Stash on Twitter. And the article really outlined how people like Iron Stash and Jacobin, and organizations like Jacobin, purchased Twitter followers and purchased a significant amount of Twitter followers. And these Twitter followers were not real people. They were bots, and they did quite a bit of research I love what they did with the data. They had a big data display showing how organic growth happens in your followers. If you look at the chart on the New York Times, it shows when you get organic and natural growth, it is a nice smooth wave of followers, increasing your followers that looks like just an increasing wave with thousands of data points. And then when you purchase followers, you get blocks. So it breaks up this nice, smooth, really consistently growing organic graph, and you start seeing really dark, concentrated blocks of people who've followed you. And that was one of the ways they've discovered who, besides getting the clientele list from this one vendor who sold thousands of people, fake users, they were also actually able to look at the data and say, this looks suspicious. This person is getting on one day, 30 times what they get on an average day, something like that, right? Just to throw out an arbitrary number to demonstrate. And so the controversy is, you're buying influence. You're buying the appearance of, more importance, or being more important than you actually naturally, organically are. And I'm not really tripping over this. I'm not. You know why? Because at the early stages, I'll be honest with you, when I first got started and I had 3 followers on Twitter, I'm like, okay, how do I get in? Maybe I should just buy some followers. I thought about buying some followers. Thankfully, I was I didn't have enough money to buy any followers. So, can you imagine how embarrassing it would be after all the work that I've done over the last 3 years for me to have been featured in that article? Damn. So I'm glad I was actually broke that week. I was like, okay, I'll just have to do this the hard way. And I did it the hard way. And we've, and that's the other thing is like, what it does, it robs people. It robs people who look at your influence and assume that you have something significant to say. It robs from them the reality that you probably don't have anything significant to say and you really aren't that influential. Right. And that's the whole point. Don't get me wrong. This is classic PR moves forever in some form or fashion. I remember there was a story of a New York Times bestseller. It's so important for you to get on that New York Times bestseller list that this one author went out and paid for 10,000 of his books and paid people to go and buy them at different places. He got on the New York Times bestsellers list and he made that money right back like the next week on, speaking engagements. And so, it's something that people have done for a long time. But it's fallen at the feet of Iron Stash and it's fallen at the feet of Jacobin. I guess I probably would be a little more, I would be harder. I would be harder on Jacobin than I would Iron Stash. And that's not fair, right? That's not fair to me. I kind of like Randy-Bryce and Jacobin. I like the work that they do. I honestly do like the work that they do over at Jacobin. But sometimes it's the intellectuals, communism and socialism that to me it becomes navel gazing and very unproductive in terms of actually moving us towards something. It becomes more intellectual than it is in practice. It becomes theoretical. It's the classical argument in at universities of whether it's about the theory or is it about the praxis. And then seeing this play out with Jacobin, I'm like, all the resources, all the influence, how much of the influence has been faked in this regard, because ultimately it should have always been about what you all have to say and what you all are trying to do. So it's kind of, it's a little more disappointing to me from the Jacobin point of view than it is to Randy Bryce, because Randy Bryce is just a politician, right? He's just a politician, and it doesn't shock me. That being said, I think that's all I have to say about that. I don't really see a huge controversy because it's been well known, well documented. I mean, you can just Google and there pops up websites. So I don't think it's a controversy. It's just a matter of character. And it's one of those things that I just slid by because I didn't have any money to go buy anybody. But I did realize early on, I realized, well, I'm growing organically and I'm growing pretty fast because I actually have something to say. So, I'm not always the best person. My character doesn't always shine bright. Sometimes I could get petty. Sometimes I could do things that are questionable in terms of the persona I try to present to the world. But I got, I guess, as fate would have it, it worked out for me, and my name is not on that list. But I'm glad it worked out for me that way, mainly because I was able to demonstrate to myself that what I'm doing is valuable, and what I'm doing has, I'm saying things that people want to hear in a very significant fashion. And so that's how I went from like 3 followers on Twitter to like 10,000 in the first couple months, and then I don't know, 30, however many I have now. Okay, one last thing. Me and Anoa Changa, we went to the the Metro Atlanta Democratic Socialist of America meeting on Saturday. We had a great time. I've been teetering back and forth, whether or not I'm going to join. Anoa went ahead and joined, and I saw that she was going. So I was like, well, if my homegirl is going to be there, I'm going to go and check it out. Glad that I did. Good group of people. More importantly than just the people, the stuff that they were doing, all of the partnerships that they had, people they were, organizations that they're in solidarity with, particularly Marshall Rancifer, who does work in the homeless community here. I've got to do a full-blown story on that guy and his story, and the story of all the people he's helped, some of the people who have died, homeless people who have died because of the freezing temperatures and the treatment of the city of Atlanta. It's just wonderful to see all the great work that's going on here locally. And I'm still teetering, still considering back and forth, teeter-totter. But more than likely, I think that's the organization I'm going to join and plant my local roots in and activism in. Because, at the end of the day, while we are all talking, and I said this to you, so I've been holding it true to myself as well, is that as we have these conversations that are very nationalized, we have to do things locally. We've got to get work done. Like, we can talk, and we have it's amazing now that we can have conversations that can impact the national discourse. And we can have that with almost having no real local activism in place. It's fascinating that you could do that, because it used to be the exact opposite. And now we're working in reverse. Like, we started with these national conversations, getting national followings and talking about national issues. And you realize, wow, you're not doing anything local. So grateful to be able to join with the people of DSA locally as soon as I actually signed the paperwork and work. And, do something locally that has a real impact on the lives of real people. It is so rewarding just listening to the stories that came across. It was so rewarding that I want to be a part of that. And hopefully you're getting out there and getting active too. The door has opened, which means my time is up. Got to take the kids to school. Have a great day, everybody. See you next time.